Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. This evening, I've thought of talking about one of the terms of the dependent origination, Upadana. In the formula of the dependent origination, one of the key transitions is from feeling to craving to clinging, which is upadana, to becoming. And because of becoming, birth, sickness, old age, and death, becoming, bhava, could also be translated as existence. And it's at that progression from upadana to bhava that the mental structure of a self is created. It crystallizes into a mental formation and organizing principle in the mind. And this is how a self comes into being. Of course, the self has no actual ontological reality. It's an organizing structure in the mind. Like all mental formations, is ultimately empty and without any substance. Upadana, the Visuddhimagga describes it as an intensification of craving. Tanha becomes upadana. A literal rendering of upadana would be, rather than clinging, which is a standard translation, and which is actually quite decent for capturing the essence of the meaning, but a literal rendering would be fuel. Upadana has the root in it, dana, same as dana as a gift, a giving. It's a giving up to support something else, upadana. So it's definitely a transitional phase. I like to describe it as that moment when craving becomes a project. That craving, tanha, is a quite primitive mental energy. It's just a greediness, I want this, or the negative form is repulsion, aversion. And it's not very sophisticated. But if it becomes intensified to the stage of clinging, upadana, then it becomes, in essence, a kind of a project in the mind. It's no longer just, I want this, but how am I going to get it? And this begins setting up the duality in the mind of self and other. Because if there's a desired object, then there must be a desirer. If there's to be a possession, there must be a possessor. So this sets up the dichotomy, the duality of self and other becomes crystallized at this stage. And out of that emerges a self view, a self structure. In the formula of the dependent origination, upadana is described as having 4 kinds. And this list is not actually exhaustive because we can find other kinds of upadana mentioned. But the 4 in the dependent origination are kama upadana, the desire or the clinging to sense objects. Ditupadana, the clinging to views. And the other 2 are also related to views, specific kinds of view. There's the Silabata Upadana, which is the clinging to formulas, rites, and rituals, and Atawada Upadana, which is the self view clinging to the view of a self. Besides these four, there's also Bhava Upadana, the clinging to becoming, and the five aggregates are described in places as clung to aggregates. So we have the body, um, feelings, perceptions, mental formations, and consciousness listed as the Kanda Upadana, the clung to aggregates, or the aggregates of clinging. So we cling to these constituents of the body-mind system. But returning to the four that are specifically mentioned in the formula for dependent origination, Kamupadana, the clinging to sense objects, is the intensification of the craving for sense objects, kamatanha. We crave pleasant sights, sounds, and so on. And if the craving is allowed to mature in the mind, it becomes clinging. And the raw desire then becomes an acquisitive mental action to either acquire the object in reality or in imagination, but it's a project. It's a movement of the mind, a crystallization around the relationship of the self that's desiring and the desired object. And this is how the duality emerges and the self emerges, and this is becoming, the next stage. At our level of being as human beings, we're part of the kama bhumi, which is the level of sense experience, the level of consciousness that relates to the world primarily through the senses. And I should probably mention that the kama here is not kama, it's a different word. It's long A and one M, kama. It means sense object or sense desire or sense experience. It's the same word that is in the Hindu text, the Kama Sutra. This is sense desire, sense experience is all kama, K long A M A. And we have a desire, the craving is to experience pleasant objects and to avoid unpleasant objects. And that impulse becomes clinging, upadana, then it becomes a fuel for further becoming. As the Buddha said in the fire sermon, that everything is on fire. The eyes, the ears, nose, tongue, body are all on fire. Fire of craving. This is the image of a burning. And upadana is the fuel that keeps the fire burning. You know? There's a parable or a simile, I'm not quite sure what you'd call it, that Ajahn Chah used to describe the mind succumbing to clinging. He spoke about the way in the old days they would capture monkeys to train them. You get a coconut and make two holes in the coconut, a small one and a little bigger one. You hollow it out, and then you put a rope through it with a knot and tie it to a tree, and it's caught on the small hole. and then you put something sweet like some mango or something dipped in honey and into the coconut. And eventually a monkey will come along and smell that and be curious, and he'll reach his paw in to grab the treat. And he can get his hand in when it's loose, but when he's got a fist around this treat, he can't get it out. His hole is too small. But he won't abandon the treat. He'll struggle and pull and scream, trying to pull his hand out, but he won't just open the hand and drop the treat and escape. And that's how they would come and catch the monkey that way. And that's the mind in clinging. We with craving, we reach the hand towards the object, and then we grasp it, and we don't want to let go, and we're trapped. And then things can seem very important to us. It's like the monkey with the treat. He won't let go of the treat. We become attached to our sense experiences, and we're not going to let it go. We're trapped. It's Mara's trap. So Kamupadana is that mechanism by which we become the tame monkeys of Mara. Ditupadana, clinging to views, is a very prevalent one in the world and has very bad results, causes a lot of trouble, and we easily fall into it. Ditthi is a view. The word is used like the English word view, so it's quite a literal translation, quite close, because the English word view has a double meaning, and so does ditthi. Could mean either a view like the experience of the eye consciousness, like the view out a window, or it could mean view in terms of a mental structure that we adhere to, like a theory or an opinion, a belief. That's all incorporated under ditthi. And there's samaditthi and micchaditthi. Samaditthi is ditthi that is in accord with reality. Is one of the factors. Is the first factor of the Eightfold Path is right view, samaditthi. But micchaditthi is wrong view, which is incorrect, not in accordance with reality. But any view, even a correct view, even the Buddha's own Dhamma, if it's clung to, then becomes a source of suffering. And the Buddha was explicit about this. He says, even these teachings of mine, if they're clung to and become a source of dogmatic adherence and of quarreling and of pride, this is right and all else is wrong, then they'll become, instead of being liberating, they'll become a source of further bondage. So clinging to views is when we're convinced we're right and all else is wrong. There are a couple of parables in the Digha Nikaya that talk about adherence to views or clinging to views. And one of them is the two men who are on a journey, and they come to an abandoned village, and they come across some firewood sticks, and the one man makes both of them at this point, they make bundles of firewood sticks and put them on their head in the Indian fashion and carry on. Oh, these firewood sticks will be useful when we get home. And after they walk a while, they come across some cloth. And the one guy says, oh, this cloth is more valuable than firewood sticks. And he throws his firewood sticks away without a second thought and makes a bundle of the cloth. The other fellow says, I've been carrying these sticks for a long while, and it seems like I don't want to waste that effort. I'll just stay with the sticks. No, okay, suit yourself, friend. And they carry on, and the story goes on and on. They keep coming across more and more valuable items, The one guy just throws away whatever he's got and takes the more valuable item, and the other guy, he's carried the stick longer and further each time, and he's more reluctant to give it up. I've carried this for miles now. It'd be such a shame to give it up. So by the time they get back to their home village, the one guy has a bundle of precious jewels, and the other guy's got some firewood sticks, enough to cook his breakfast for a few days, and that. And the Buddha then explains the parable as being attachment to views. If you have a view and opinion and you carry it, you become attached to it because you've identified yourself with it. I've held this to be true for so long, I'm not giving it up now. And one aspect of this story that may be overlooked is the Buddha didn't praise someone who came back to the village with an empty head. You know, he praised the one who would abandon one bundle and pick up another easily when he saw it was superior. So he's not saying we shouldn't have any opinions or views, and that you'd be kind of an idiot if you didn't, you didn't have any belief structure or opinions or views. But the problem is when you're dogmatically attached to them, and if you've held them a long time and don't want to give them up, and you're right and everyone else is wrong. I think a good mental exercise is if you find yourself in a dispute over views. Even it doesn't have to be with animosity, but you're just having a discussion and you're having some disagreement on an opinion. To ask yourself, why am I defending this point of view? Is it just because I don't want to lose? I don't want to seem like the loser and, give up my view that these sticks that I've carried for so far? Or it may be that, on an honest examination, you may say, well, I actually do think this is the better position. But very often we just hold on to a position because we've held it before, and we don't, if we change it now, we might, feel that we're defeated or something. So attachment to views causes people to fall into a lot of animosity and disputes and even violence, and wars and things are on a large scale can be fought over different ideologies or religions or what have you. So this is something that actually the Buddhists spoke about fairly often, the danger of attachment to views. And the other two are particular views that can cause trouble when they're clung to, when they become a fuel for becoming. One is Silabbata Padana. Silabbata is also found in the list of the 10 fetters, Silabbata Paramasa. This is usually translated rite and rituals attachment or rite and ritual clinging. That's not a good translation, and a number of attempts have been made to come up with a better translation. The literal translation would be morals and duties, sila and bata. They're the do's and don'ts. Sila is the precepts. Sila is the morality, the ethics, which are formulated as a list of don'ts, right? Like don't kill, don't steal, so on. And bata are duties that should be done. So they're the do's. So in themselves, they're good. They're both positive. You should certainly keep sila, certainly perform your duties. But when it becomes clinging, the real meaning of it is that the mind is taking a superstitious or mechanical view of the Dhamma. And if we look at the historical context when the Buddha was teaching, the kind of established religion, the orthodox religion of the time was the Vedic Brahmanism, which was very much based on ritual and sacrifice. And they had the idea, like a lot of the Vedas are just formulas for sacrifice and ritual involved in a sacrifice. They had the idea that if you performed a sacrifice flawlessly, then the gods were compelled to grant you this favor, right? So the Brahmins would do these elaborate ceremonies, and the gods would give you children or fertile fields or cure your sick mother or whatever, what you request. And if it didn't happen, then it was obviously some mistake was made in the ceremony. So some syllable was forgotten, or somebody had their mudra, the fingers in the wrong mudra. So we'll have to do it again. A few more kahapanas, please, and we'll try it again. So there was this, in India, there was this ritualistic background. And this plays out even in later times in other cultures, maybe not to that extent. Well, certainly not to that extent. That's probably the extremity in human history of Silabhata Paramasa. But when people have a ritualistic approach or idea of the Dhamma, which gets very subtle, like a lot of people would think, "Oh, I don't believe in rites and rituals. I'm not. That's not a problem for me. I'm not superstitious like that." But it becomes at a subtle level in the meditation. It becomes a problem that there's like an adherence to technique, so that the meditation becomes rote. Uh, there's no letting go in there. The Buddha gives the simile of the man crossing the stream with a raft, right? It's a traveler comes to a stream and he wants to get across the stream, so he takes some bamboos that are growing there and he cuts them down and makes a raft and gets himself across the river. But then, would he be such a foolish person as to try and climb up on the bank with the raft on his back? Try and hang on to the raft? No, the raft has done its duty. Now it can be abandoned. Right? And again, there's an aspect to that story that people miss sometimes. There's the opposite extreme of being completely without any structure. You don't start tearing apart the raft in the middle of the river. Right? You let the raft do its thing. And this is with any form of meditation, that it's a discipline and a structure to it that one follows, but there's a subtle overstepping of that when it becomes an attachment to a particular form. And the final realization, the realization of the unconditioned, is not something that you can do. It's not a set procedure that can lead to realization of the unconditioned. The raft takes you as far as equanimity about formations, and then the unconditioned can just happen. And the final, or the fourth upadana in this list is attavada upadana, attachment to a self-view. Vada is like a system of thought. So we have the Theravada is the school of the elders. Attawada is having a system of thought or a theory or an adherence to a view of self as an existing thing. If that's held in the mind, then that becomes a very big hindrance to release and liberation. It becomes a real blockage. Uh, there's a degree of self-view, personality view, Sakaya Ditti, in everyone prior to stream entry. It's inevitable that that's in the mind, but that's like a default assumption or just a way of thinking, and that can be attenuated, and it should be attenuated. It should be part of the practice leading up to stream entry, and to make stream entry possible, you attenuate the Sakaya Ditti as much as possible, seeing through it. And there's said to be two approaches to that. One is undermining the sense of self by looking closer and closer at internal phenomena. This is the way of approach that's formalized in Abhidhamma. Right? You break up the body and mind into component parts and not find a self anywhere. This is Melinda's chariot. Right? The other way is to see everything as relational. That's the other approach, is approaching it from the other side. Nothing exists from its own side. Everything is a product of cause and conditions. And this is given formal expression in the dependent origination. So you see there's no discrete entities anywhere. There's only results of intersecting causes. So that's Sakaya Ditti personality view, but Attawada is when that becomes formalized or adhered to as a view, and you attached to some sense of me and mine, that, that this is real, this is important, this is substantial, and that becomes a vada, a view. It can be internalized on an individual basis, but it can be formalized as schools of thought. Well, we have in East and West, we have systems of thought that have a definite adherence to the idea of a self-essence of some kind. In the Buddha's context of ancient India, this would be the view of the Atman, which is the Sanskrit version of Atta. Atman was the prevalent view in India that there was this imperishable essence of a person that survived death and carried on from life to life. As it says in the Bhagavad Gita, a later Hindu text, but expressing this idea that was already prevalent at the Buddha's time, the man dying and being reborn is like a man going to bed and waking up and putting on a fresh suit of clothes. The Atman just continues from life to life. So the Buddha taught anatta, or Sanskrit, that's anatman, not self. Right? And the formalization of that view, adherence to that view, becomes a big block to liberation, because there's something in the mind that you're not prepared to give up, to abandon, to relinquish. There's this, give everything up but this core essence. And the Buddha said, there is no core essence. What are you clinging to? It's just an illusion. So these are the four kinds or aspects of Upadana: clinging to sense objects, clinging to views, clinging to formulaic practice, and clinging to self-view. And all of these can be seen as variants of some project of creating a self, of this, making a self out of raw experience. Whereas the actual experience is just mind alighting on an object and consciousness arising to sense the object, and no third besides. There's nobody doing it. It's just this process going on. But if we fall into this craving of wanting things a certain way, then that can mature into this clinging, the upadana, and then we're kind of trapped. Once it goes to that stage, then we've got another round of the wheel. We've turned the dependent origination, and we're on the merry-go-round for another round, you know? And it leads to becoming, which becomes birth, old age, and death. And that's interpreted on different levels. On the obvious level of lifetimes. So this is how we come into being, why we're reborn again and again, because we have this clinging to wanting to experience. We're clinging to sense objects, and we're clinging to a sense of me. But it also happens momentarily. Like when you come into being again and again through the course of the day, every time you fall into clinging on an object, you create a little birth and death. You have a desire for another spoonful of ice cream, and you come into being as the taster of the ice cream, and then the ice cream is gone, and there's a little death. It's the ending of that experience. And just to make one last final point, back up on the dependent origination one stage, feeling leads to craving, Vedana leads to tanha, and it's to be remembered. That's the critical point of practice. If you can see feeling turning into craving and stop it there, that's like the weak link in the chain. Then it's like a snowball rolling downhill. It gets stronger and stronger as it goes, and once you've succumbed to clinging, it's very hard to break. So I'll stop there.